Nice, I just added in a dangerous exploding item that does a bunch of damage. I wonder what would happen if we gave it to an... oh no. Howdy, and welcome to Game Endeavor, where I post devlogs with an emphasis on game design and technique. With the Ludum Dare finished, it's time to get back to my project. I've done a lot since the last devlog, so this one will be narrowing the focus on the items and equipment that I've added, as well as what purpose they serve. I'm creating a mini RPG game where you explore a tiny open world that acts like a puzzle, which you solve to unlock access to new areas with new enemies and features. To unlock these new areas, you need to explore the world and find items that you can use to open them up. For example, you may discover a bow and some boom arrows, which allow you to destroy obstacles that are in your way. Or, you could strike fear into the heart of your enemies. Take that, Goobles, you lonely goblin. These items serve an important purpose because without restricting access to the new areas in the game, the player could just roam around wherever they wanted without any challenges in their way and nothing to motivate them to move forward. But I don't want to create just a bunch of items, give them one purpose and expect the game to be much fun. This will create very shallow gameplay. The item will be the equivalent of giving the player a key that opens a door and expecting them to be super excited about it. Keys are great, don't get me wrong. When you get one, you know it's going to unlock a new area that you haven't seen before. But once you use a key, that's it. The novelty quickly wears off, and now you have a chunk of metal in your pocket. Maybe it'll open another door in the future, but beyond that, it's not very exciting. So when I'm designing these areas, I'm trying to think about what other purposes they may serve towards the gameplay. Explosions are great for destroying obstacles in your path, but what else can they be used for? Well, what if you strap one to a stick and sling it through the air? Then you could give the feature some combat functionality and give the player something that they could be skilled at. So I created some boom arrows, which do less damage and have a smaller radius than traditional bombs, but they're still a lot of fun to use and the archer characters can get excited about finding them because this will affect their combat capabilities. Doing this gives the game more depth as opposed to being a shallow puddle. The more depth that a game has, the more players will be able to explore the various mechanics and discover various potentials that each mechanic has. This is increased even more if you can combine multiple mechanics in your game to serve a new purpose, like using the boom arrows to remove armor from an enemy that would be much more difficult otherwise. When creating new mechanics, I try to be creative with what I can do. With the boom arrows, I have added a utility function, the ability to destroy obstacles, and a combat function, being able to destroy any goblin that gives you the wrong look. But you could even add in some social functions, like perhaps your character is a sociopath that threatens others with boom arrows at point blank range. Since I added in the boom arrow, this means that the player needs to be able to choose what type of ammo they want to use. Or I could just make every arrow in the game boom arrows. I did try to give archer goblins boom arrows just for fun, but they ended up blowing themselves up with it. It was amusing though, so I may add this into the game as a funny moment. Maybe you encounter a new enemy in the game that has explosive arrows, but the first one you encounter has a bad accident with them. But since changing all the arrows in the game is a terrible idea, I've added in an ammo slot that the player can equip their desired ammo into. Whenever the bow is fired, it checks this slot to get the item, and that item tells it what projectile to use, which means technically I could just tell it to use a bomb. Actually not a bad idea actually. With this new ammo slot, I've also added in regular arrows that are required for the use of the bow. Personally, I really like it when a game requires ammo for a weapon to be used because it makes you consider every single shot, rather than just firing at will. But I'll need to make sure the arrows are plenty enough that the player won't be afraid to use the bow, but not so plentiful that it makes the whole purpose of having regular arrows useless. One of the things I'm really happy with is the visual for the explosions. I mentioned in my Ludum Dare video about how I had learned a better way to handle gradients with particles, but in case you missed it, I found out that if you duplicate a single color and then stretch it to just before it changes, then your particles will adhere to your palette better than changing gradually to every color in between, which really helps if you're going with a pixel art aesthetic. But even with these particles, it still didn't have the impact that it should have. It lacked the oomph needed to really sell this as a powerful explosion. But while streaming these changes on my Discord, my friend and fellow YouTuber Lucy mentioned how she flashes stars in her explosion effects. So I experimented with ways that I could implement something like this for myself, and I thought it would look great to have some small stars shooting out of the center really fast, and this really made the explosion feel much more impactful. After that, the only missing thing was screen shake and the overall effect was complete, making it one of the favorite things that I've added to this game so far. The screen shape even weakened the further away it is from the center of the screen, so you get a sense for how far away it is. Something I want to achieve with my game is to offer up different solutions to a problem that the player may be facing. Give the player choices in how they approach problems rather than solving the puzzles I provide linearly and in the same way every time. The explosion mechanic is entirely separate from the boom arrow item. This means that I can have other explosive items in the game, such as a traditional bomb item which is a little harder to use in combat but has greater damage and a larger radius, allowing you to damage more enemies in one area. The player could use these as an alternative explosive to the boom arrows. With all these new items being added to the game, I needed a way to manage them in the inventory, so I added in a UI system. UI systems are, in my opinion, one of the more boring aspects of game development. They require a lot of work that doesn't progress the game mechanically, but they're still pretty essential. Luckily, I could just reuse much of the work from Zonic our streamer, but this game handles inventory a little bit different. The big difference is the equipment. The player has equipment slots which they can store their weapons and accessories. I've created a main hand slot, offhand slot, and 3 accessory slots. These can store things such as items that grant your character abilities like double jump or dashing. With the main and offhand slots, the character will be able to equip 2 separate items if they choose so, like a sword in one hand and a bow in the other, allowing them to quickly use either item at the click of a button. It's important to note that this whole system is very much experimental right now. I like the ability to switch between these 2 items, but when we start considering 2-handed items, it gets a little trickier. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Whenever you have a game like this, it can be annoying to have to stop what you're doing, pause the game, and change your equipment to what you want to be using. I mean, it's a little easier in a game because the enemies are nice enough to wait for you while you do this, but it can still hamper the flow of combat. To fix this, I've added in a hotbar, which allows you to quickly use and equip items. I have a hotbar in Zone Cursed Dreamer, but this one is a little tricky because it stores its own references to the items rather than being a container for them. The main purpose for doing this is because I want to have the option to store other things in the hotbar in the future, like maybe some magic spells, but that's for a future video. So the hotbar needs to be separated from the inventory. The plus side to this is that it doesn't consider a single stack of items, but rather all of the items in your inventory. So you can put potions in one slot of the hotbar, and it will count all of the potions in your inventory. If you run out of that specific item, then the icon simply fades out a little bit until you obtain more of them. The downside to this is that it adds more complexity to the equipment system. If you put an item in your hotbar and then use it, then currently the game will equip it, which means it will need to unequip your current item and add in the new one, adding the old one back into your inventory, which brings us back to the issue with 2-handed weapons. If you were to have 2 items equipped in each hand, and then equip the 2-handed weapon, it would need to remove both of those items, add in the 2-handed weapon, and then put the 2 items back into your inventory. If your inventory is full when you do this, then there's only one free slot, meaning that one of these items will need to be dropped to the ground. This would be extremely frustrating for the player because it would happen anytime they change from using 2 weapons to a 2-handed weapon. This is why I'm considering having a penalty system instead. The player could keep an item in their offhand, but using it would come at a penalty. I would just need to make sure that this is obvious and something that they would not miss, like perhaps adjusting the color of the offhand slot. Alternatively, I could just not let them use the offhand weapon. I'm still working on this issue, so let me know what you think about it in the comments. I kinda like the idea of allowing dual wield and 2-handed weapons though. When I played Neverwinter Nights 2 back in the day, I had a character that dual wielded scythes because why not? The best part was that you could actually obtain proficiency that allowed you to do this without a penalty. Another option would be to just not have the hotbar equipped items. You could have 2 equipment slots which already offer some flexibility during combat. Being able to also change equipment from the hotbar may not be necessary. I've created a Kickstarter page for this project because one of the most valuable lessons I've learned from my unsuccessful Kickstarter last time is to create your page early and promote it often. There's a link in the description to that page where you can follow the project and get notified as soon as it launches. If you want to watch more videos like this, then there's a playlist in the corner where you can binge watch all of my content. Thank you to all the patrons that support these videos, and I'll talk to you next time.